Today's subject, we're going to bring out the inner power gamer and go over min-maxing your character. This is one of those things that everybody kind of looks at and questions whether or not they even need to bother with it, but I'll give some general tips on what you can do if you're only somewhat caring about it as well. The reason why this is so important in the first place is that every character in the game has a maximum that they can have in each of their base stats. If you invest too heavily into one of those, what's going to happen is you're going to hit your maximum super early, and then every single level up from that point onward, there's going to be a waste in that stat that you could have been using on something else. So distributing your stats properly is actually super important if you want to make yourself as powerful as possible. But there's certain stats you can more or less ignore because they don't make very much of a difference in this game. What we're going to be talking about today is finally going to let you know what's going on with these materials that we keep on seeing drop and just stuffing into the bank. These are going to be super important for actually figuring out how to maximize your character's stats, as each of them actually do give you base stat increases. There are materials for HP, power, mind, defense, evasion, and luck, respectively. There's also this thing called TP materials, but they're so extraordinarily difficult to get that it's not even worth talking about them. Oh, but the big thing here is that some of these materials are a lot more useful than others, and I'm going to go over just what you have to be looking out for. Each stat plan is going to end up being fairly unique in terms of how to max those stats the most efficiently. Some characters also get extra benefits to make this easier, such as human characters having an extra 100 materials to use. The stat differential between them and other characters isn't even really all that different, so most of the humans are extremely easy to max. I'm going to go over a bit of what's on screen though, as there's quite a bit to talk about. When making any stat plan, the only level to really consider is the maximum one of level 200. So what I'm showing on screen is the base stats if you've changed nothing about them at level 200, as well as what their maximum can be at any point. I'm also showing how many materials can be used to kind of emphasize the difference between humans and everybody else, as well as what's called the stat differential. What this is calculating all the differences between the base stats and the max, and showing how much you have to put into to actually max them out. Some people require a lot more love than others. Some of these stat differentials really show that Sega's balance team must have been drunk or something. The amount of points required to actually max out your stats at level 200 is obscene on certain characters, such as the human whale, for example. You pretty much have to make sure you get everything perfect, and you're probably going to be using up as much as you can to try and max out those stats, and in some ways it's not even worth it, because you're wasting space for valuable items, such as, slots that could give you a different bonus. What these stat layouts are showing, though, is that investing pretty heavily into your key offensive stat seems to be a good thing to do. Most of them have a pretty massive stat difference between their base and their max, so it's not such a bad thing to just go all offense. You'll probably max out eventually, but it's not too bad. Looking these over also makes it pretty clear that Newmans were probably supposed to have 250 materials to use as well somewhere in the development time of this game. But I guess they got switched around at some point and nobody bothered to put the stats back to where they should have been, so we have these massive stat differentials for all the Newmans that they have just no hope of maxing out without putting in way too much effort. Now that we have a bit of an idea of what we're trying to accomplish though, time to talk about what you actually have to do to pull it off in the first place. Materials are the key part of it, but there's also two more things to keep in mind that will increase your base stats. The big one's going to be your mag. Your mag's responsible for increasing your base stats as well, and it's pretty much the key to actually increasing these offensive stats as much as the difference is expecting. You can also get the base stat increases out of your slot items, so that's the big thing. Each armor can have a maximum of 4 slots to work with, and these can be extremely key to actually figuring out what you're going to do with your stat plan in the first place. The first and probably most important thing to talk about is your mag. I know I've already talked about these things in 2 different ways already, but they're still extremely important. The big thing about the mag is that you can find more, so this is the only part of your stat plan that you can actually change if something goes wrong. So don't worry about them too much. The first one you should probably still focus a lot on your offense though, just saying. The big thing to know is what your mag stats do to your base stats. The mag's defense will bump up your base defense by 1 point. The mag's power will bump up your base attack power by 2 points. The mag's dexterity will bump up your accuracy by half a point. And the mag's mind will bump up your MST by 2 points. The most important thing about this breakdown is that defense is actually a waste. You only get 1 point of defense from every point of the mag's defense level, whereas with a defense material, you get 2 points. So what you should be doing instead is focusing on defense materials and try to keep your mag down to 5 defense as much as you can. Anything more than 5 or 6 is a complete waste, so do try to maintain it. This is going to require looking at charts to let you know what feeding your mag will do, or just memorizing it from experimentation. Another important thing about this breakdown is aside from certain slot items, your mag's dexterity is the only way you can actually increase your base accuracy. Most people don't have a very big differential between their base accuracy and their max, so your mag's pretty much all you ever need. You can take some shortcuts here and there if you expect to have a certain slot in at all times, but for the most part, you don't generally need more than about, say, 46 or 52 levels in your mag or so into dexterity. The rest you can just pump straight into your offense. As your mag levels up, it really shows just how huge of a difference it'll make on your stats. The example shown here, it's not even maxed out, it's only like a level 130 or so. That attack power is going to go a lot higher still. It really just goes to show that the mag is one of the most important parts in terms of any of your statistics. If you want to give your second character a super easy time, finish leveling up their mag before you even start playing as them if you have some spare money on your other characters and feel like dragging around with you. The next thing to talk about is slots, and this one, what ideal slots you have available is going to vary heavily depending on which version of the game you're playing. Blueburst introduced some extremely overpowered slots that really helped in maxing out certain characters, whereas the GameCube version stuck with some rather lackluster slots that aren't really as efficient. One of the biggest ones that Blueburst added was the V101, which gives you the effect of a really big attack speed boost, as well as giving you a ton of base stats to increase. Whereas before, on the GameCube edition, you just had a separate slot for increasing your attack speed. It was pretty much essential, so having them combined together really helps a lot. Blueburst also made things more difficult in a way. It introduced a lot of slot items that actually help out in different ways aside from increasing your base stats. A good example of this being the V801, which every force is going to want, because it actually heavily decreases the amount of time it takes to cast a spell. There's also things like the Smartling, which allows characters like Hunters and Forces to hit as well with guns and other ranged weapons as Rangers. So there's a lot of stuff in there that does nothing to your base, but it increases your offense in its own way so much that you're going to want it anyways. So these are things you really had to consider when planning out just how you want to max out your stats, and which ones you may want to forego if you want to not use up all your slots on these stat increasing ones. You really want to aim for the most efficient slot items in terms of trying to max out your character stats. The big ones on Blueburst to look out for are Centurion ability, which increases all your stats by 30, except for accuracy, which only goes up by 1.5, as well as the Adept, which actually decreases TP consumption, but also gives you a huge bonus to your attack accuracy by 20, while also giving it more to the rest of your stats as well. Those ones are very important for characters that are just desperate to increase their maximum accuracy without having to waste a ton of levels on their mag, such as the Unimorph. If you're curious about what slots are available in your version of the game, I'd recommend going over to PSO World and giving it a browse to its rare units, as it actually does a good job labeling exactly what is available on which version. Now do know, some servers for Blueburst actually do add their own custom items, including slot items, so this won't exactly be going over the most ideal way of doing it on every server, but I'll just do it with basic vanilla Blueburst in mind. Alright, now that we understand that base stats are increased through material usage, your mag, as well as certain slots in your armor, we'll be able to actually go over managing these base stat increases, keeping track of your material usage, and just setting you up for success when trying to figure out what to do with your character's stats. Aside from just using a notepad, a couple of other ways you can keep track of your material usage that I can think of. Most Blueburst servers actually have a / command that lets you see your current material usage. This is usually just /mac counts, which you type in chat in order to see it. It shows there on the middle of the screen for the server that I was on. There's also the option of using an external program, such as the PSO Character Manager that I found on PSO World a while ago. I can't seem to find it now, but it's probably still available through other means, or even more up-to-date things as well. If you're playing the GameCube version of the game, I highly recommend the Character Manager, as the base stats and maximum stats on there are based purely on the GameCube version. There's also section IDs that it shows that line up with the GameCube version as well. If you're playing Blueburst, it's still not too bad of a thing to use, just because it keeps track of your material usage really easily and has a nice interface. But pretty much every Blueburst server has changed material maximums or base stats and max stats of some classes in some way, so it's not going to be 100% accurate. So it's one of those things, make sure to do some research on the server that you're playing on to see what the new maximums are. You can usually find this in the server forums or anywhere else. So make sure to look around, that way it can help you figure out how to adjust a material plan to actually get it set up the way you want. But these are both good ways to actually keep track of just how much has been used, and that way you can make sure to try to not use something too much by mistake. Another quick thing to bring up, if you look at this particular example to the HP material usage, you'll see that I've actually pumped the full 125 in there. I haven't really talked about it yet, so HP materials as well as TP materials, they don't count towards anything else. You can safely use those the second you find them until you can't use any more. Both of them can use up to a maximum of 125 each, so you can get an extra 250 HP and 250 TP. Still don't recommend going after TP materials because they're not gunning in conventional methods and they will drive you crazy trying to grind out all 125. Just saying. 250 TP is generally not worth the effort. Plus, if you're playing an Android, you don't even have to care. Okay, now we finally understand base stats and max stats, how to keep track of our material usage, what raises our base stats, and everything else of that matter. Let's finally actually talk about creating a stat plan and kind of the process that you go through and trying to make this one work. Now, everybody has their own style of doing it, so I'm going to be kind of going over it my way. But if you have your own preferred method, go for it. It's just whatever sort of stats you're looking for. Let's go ahead and use a full model, for example. We've already quickly looked over the base stats and the max stats at 200 for a full model. So the first step to this process is understanding just how much of a difference there is between the base stat and the max stat for each. Now that we have that established, the next part is focusing on how we're going to get all those numbers brought to zero. The first thing I always focus on is the mag. The mag is the most interchangeable part, and it allows us to give our character the easiest early stat boost. So I always keep in mind, okay, what's a good thing for this character to have right out of the gate so they can have an easy time instead of being like our first character who had to struggle through the early stages. The first thing to keep in mind, all mags start off at level 5 and will always have those 5 points in defense. So the first thing you need to do is go ahead and take 5 points off of the amount needed to max out defense, as you're not going to be able to avoid that, so let's just consider it automatically. The first stat I like to focus on is accuracy. Since the mag's one of the only things that can actually change this, I try to actually make it do all the work on this one. Now we may end up tweaking this depending on the character, but since the full model actually has a really easy stat plan, we don't need to worry about it. We're just going to go ahead and have the mag max out accuracy and not worry about slots. Now since you get half a point of accuracy per mag level, you will need 52 levels of dexterity in order to max out a full model's accuracy at level 200. Now the full model's an interesting one for this next one. There's a couple of different ways you can go about the initial mag. You can either try and pump as much mind into it as possible to help with her spellcasting, or you can try and give her a little bit more attack power to work with so she can just kind of hit things with her stick or saber or whatever you have on the early stages, just to try and make things a little bit easier and involve less money being spent on fluids. So let's kind of go a more balanced route by focusing on both our attack power as well as mind on this mag. The reason why we can't go all in with attack power is because if you put all those levels into power on your mag, you're going to go well past her max stats. You can still do that with an early mag, just so you can just use the power as much as possible while it's there, but you can still have to get a new one prepared just to make sure it wasn't a waste later on. Another thing I keep in mind is if we're talking about Blue Burst, if you're actually using a weapon with a full model, you're probably going to have V101 equipped, so it's okay to leave your power at 15 points until max if you want to. That way the slot can actually take care of it for you. If you don't care about that though, go ahead and put 76 levels of power into your mag. Since we don't want any defense levels on our mag, this makes the remaining levels of it super easy. All we need to do is go ahead and put the remaining 67 into mind. With this, our mag will be at level 200, and that'll be all the points that it can actually offer for us. So with the mag all maxed out, the next thing to move on to is our material usage. And since we are working with a human character, we have an extra 100 to work with, so it shouldn't be too bad to go ahead and max this thing out. The next thing you're going to want to do is focus entirely on your key offensive stat. If it's not maxed out yet, then go ahead and do it now. Since every material gives you 2 points in that respective stat, and we have 216 points to go to max our mind, we need to go ahead and use 108 mind materials right off the bat. With those materials used, we've actually maxed out all of our key offensive stats, but there's still another side offensive stat that we should probably max out too. Luck! The stat actually never increases on its own. It only increases with luck materials, as well as slots that increase your luck. But that's the thing, it's actually a nice stat. When it's maxed out, you have a 25% chance of scoring a critical hit, instead of the starting 2.5% chance. So you should probably go ahead and max that one out too, because the full model uses weapons sometimes. It'd be nice if she could crit more often and get some more respectable damage. So go ahead, put in another 45 luck materials, and we'll have ourselves maxed out luck without having to wear any slots. Now brace yourself, we're going to get into a little bit of math as we go into what's left. So far we used 153 materials out of the 250 we can use. That means we have 97 left. Or, if we look at this as potential stat points, we have 194 stat points available left. If we total up the points that we actually need to max everything though, we're a little short, as that comes to 217. So there's 23 more stat points that we have to worry about. Now, that means there's two different ways we can go about this. If we go ahead and max one stat entirely, and at least that full 23 in one of the other stats, and we come up a little bit short of a convenient slot being able to max it out. So we'll set at everything but one stat maxed out, and one that just kind of floats around at almost max. Alternatively, we can keep in mind our stats with that slot equipped. So I'm considering the V101 for when we want to actually use physical weapons as opposed to magic. This gives us 15 in each of our stat points, so what we should do is leave evasion sitting at 15, and then just put as much as we can into defense from there to leave the remaining 8. This will result in us having maximum stats whenever we're wearing a V101 at level 200. The end result of this is we'll have a character that has all their stats gold at level 200 whenever they have that V101 equipped. And if they don't have it and are just doing spellcasting, then the ones that aren't maxed out are defense and evasion, the two most useful stats in the game. So you actually have all your key ones without having to worry about kind of the side ones. The reason why defense and evasion are so useless is because there's so many attacks in this game that do set damage no matter what your defensive stats are that you can't even evade in the first place. So since these scale so poorly, your offense is going to matter a heck of a lot more than your defense. The defense will help a little bit, but in the long run it helps so little that it's just not even worth it. When you're making your own stat plans, make sure to keep this in mind. Your defense and evasion, it really doesn't matter very much. Out of the two, put more focus on defense, since evasion's even more situational. But the big thing here is that you're going to want to try to max out your offensive stats. This is especially important when working with difficult characters like any of the Newmans that can barely max their stats even with the most ideal slots. Because you want those slots open. You want to be able to use cure units if you need them in difficult places where you might get frozen a lot, or things like the V801 or Smart Link that I mentioned earlier, or the V502 to increase status attacks. All that good stuff is blocked by your slots, so the more of those you can free up in your stat plan, the better. Either way though, go about it your own way and try to figure out a nice ideal way of going about it. Just make sure not to waste anything, as that's going to be the biggest key when making your own stat plans, is making sure not to go too far. Just remember, once you've hit the maximum of your base stat, it'll turn gold. You can kind of see a demo of this with any android character, because their MST can't go above 0, so it'll always be gold. So remember, the goal is to get everything gold if you can. But not every character can do it easily, so just do it to the best of your abilities and max those offensive stats. With that though, we've reached the end of what I wanted to talk about when it comes to min-maxing your character. It's a bit of a headache and involves a lot of math, but the important thing is that it gets you to the most ideal setup once you're done. You know, most people don't get to level 200, so it's not too bad to pump a bit more into your offense than you should. But really, this is something to keep in mind if you want to be at your absolute maximum power if you're going to put a ton of time into this game. I know I don't really expect it with how old the game's gotten, but hey, it's a good thing to talk about and to keep in mind when you're actually going about building your character, and when you see that excessive number of defense and evade materials that will inevitably drop and try to sabotage your offense. With all this said and done though, just remember the key points. Keep track of your material usage in one way or another, just so you know how much you've used it at a given time. Mag defense levels are useless, so try to prevent those, as the defense materials are inevitably more efficient. Slots increase your base stats, so they're not giving you anything extra, it just increases the base, so they're used in part of trying to max out your character. All that good stuff. You need to keep it in mind if you want to try to reach an ideal amount of power later on into the game. Once again, offense is greater than defense in every possible way in PSO, so make sure that if you're going to be going overboard on anything, it's your offensive stats and not your defensive ones. Stockpile those materials and get yourself prepared for any of them. as you're gonna probably have more than one character anyways, so it doesn't hurt to have some spares laying around. Remember, HP and TP materials have their own counters, so you don't have to worry about using them, just eat them the second you find them. These are all key points to remember when trying to min-max, or at least try to play your character in such a way that you won't feel weak. So overall, hopefully these tips have been super helpful if anybody's actually still playing this silly old game, and I'll see you guys next time as we move on to the next main area of the game, the mines. Catch you next time!